And we're live, UFC 325 recap, episode 4 of Rolling Thunder MMA. Levi, how was the event, mate? You were live and direct there, looking in what row were you sitting in to watch Volkanovski reclaim the title against Diego Lopes?
Sitting in the fifth row, I had a perfect seat. It was kind of angled perfectly looking at the octagon. So I rarely had to look up at the screen, man. The aura, just the energy in that place was absolutely unreal. And the TV does not do it justice, especially for Volkanovski's walkout, for all the Aussies walkouts. It was incredible. Couldn't hear for a good while. After that main event. But mate, what an incredible card. And that Sydney crowd absolutely showed up. It was awesome.
I've heard people are calling for Volkanovski to replace Anthony Albanese as the next Prime Minister. I think he'll do a far
Mate,
better job.
absolutely.
Mate,
Absolutely.
I
Yeah,
think I'm,
that'd be
I'm
a good
I'm
one.
definitely behind that one. But yeah, we'll kick it off. Obviously, you were there for an absolutely fantastic performance from Quillan Salkeld. Got a bit of a face crank rear naked choke submission. Do you want to talk us through how you saw that one? You were there live, so I think there's no one better to talk about it.
Yeah, no, it was a really, really solid performance from Quillen. Obviously, went to the offensive wrestling. There was a bit of countering there from Jamie. Quillen ended up hitting this beautiful throw on him, got him down as we saw to sort of a side control position. Ended up on the back, but not sort of a traditional rear naked choke. No body triangle, that kind of thing. Just had the hooks in, but as you said, it was quite a good face crank. Really good submission. I don't think people appreciate Quillen's grappling enough.
Mm.
I think it's actually quite underrated. A lot of people lost a bit of money on him by knockout. I
Mm.
was still super confident that he was going to win this fight. I expected a bit more of a barn burner, a bit more of a scrap. But I think it's probably a good thing for Quillen because it means that he can make a quick turnaround, maybe come back, just before or maybe at the White House against a Michael Chandler. That would be an awesome fight for him. I think it might be a bit quick, but I think, 4 wins in the space of pretty much a year is a pretty good introduction to the UFC. I think he's right on the cusp of the rankings. So if it's not someone higher up there like a Michael Chandler, maybe you give him the number 15 ranked. Maybe you give him Fares Arm or someone like
Mm.
that, someone who's kind of on the way up to that top 15 spot. What were your thoughts on that fight?
Yeah, very similar to yourself. I was actually one of those people who I hadn't seen him exhibit that grappling quite so much. Obviously, in his post-fight interview, he spoke about that, his bread and butter is the grappling. He's just had a lot of success with the striking in his last couple of fights. So it was really, really nice to see him hit a nice lateral drop, throw in his hooks really. He was really crisp in his jiu-jitsu. And I think what people sometimes forget in the UFC is mate, a finish is a finish. It doesn't need to look pretty. He didn't need to get that under the chin. Malarkey looked extremely uncomfortable in there. It was just so crisp right in front. He gave a cheeky little wink to some of the commentators I saw as he got the back, as he was taking the back. And I agree with you. I thought he'd get through Malarkey. Being in Volk's camp, I thought Malarkey would maybe put up a bit more of a fight. I thought we'd get at least 2 rounds, but hey ho, that's the way things go in the UFC there. So fantastic for him. I think he definitely has a ranked opponent next. I think he's got a stronger case as ever. Does he get a Michael Chandler? I don't personally think so because at the White House, Chandler's American. He's probably going to be. I could see Chandler headlining the prelims unless he's fighting someone like a McGregor, which
Mm.
Dana's kind of starting to shut down quite early on. I think it's going to be a little bit of a jump, and I just don't think he quite has the stardom yet to the level that they'd want to build him to outside of Australia. Obviously, he's an Australian fan favorite, and he's starting to break into that international market. But I'd like to see him maybe fight like a Faraz Ziam or a Manuel
Yeah.
Torres. It just depends what they do with that bottom. I actually have a feeling they could feed him if they want to accelerate him up the rankings to a guy who's on a bit of a slide, Benil Dariush. I think it might be a bit of a jumping competition in regards to the grappling, but then you look at the weekend and you go, is it? He just hasn't had the opportunity to yet fight that next competition. But yeah, I can definitely see him getting a fight from someone between 11 and 15 ranked. Obviously, there's going to be a bit of a reshuffle with Hoofy winning as well. And Fazeev probably going to drop down a couple of spots. But yeah, super interesting fight. Super exciting. I honestly don't think it could have been a better way to open the main card. Anyway,
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think we're pretty unanimous. We're on the Quill and Salkeld hype train, so we'll continue to ride. But yeah, we'll move over to the big boys. How'd you see that one go down in the next fight?
Yeah, look, there was a really good crowd reception to Ty. You know, people love him. He's a true blue, but unfortunately, his performance was so. You know, we saw a very slow fight between these two. You know, Taliesin Teixeira, this was his first win outside of the first round. It's his first fight, I think, to go outside of the first round. What we saw was two heavyweights with no cardio at all. And, you know, these guys are in sort of that top 15 area of the division. And like we spoke about in the predictions, the division really has no depth. And
Mm,
it makes me more excited for prospects like Josh Hockett, Volta Walker, you know, these guys who are actually showing dominance and skill in mixed martial arts. What we saw was a slow street fight esque fight where Ty gassed pretty much immediately, had to cut to make heavyweight, and had no
mm,
cardio. Taliesin went to the grappling,
that's what I
which
was
I
just about to
think
say. Do you think that had an impact on the gas tank of both men?
I think it had an impact on both of them. You know, I think that both of these guys, as much as I love Ty, you know, as much as Taliesin may be a promising prospect, I think neither of them have stepped on an assault bike in their life. And, you know, if you want to be successful in the premier mixed martial arts organization in the world, which is the UFC, look at the difference between Tom Aspinall and Tai Tuivasa. They're 11 rankings apart.
Mm,
Aspinall is an athletic heavyweight. Even guys like Cyril Gahn, you know, your Pavlovich, your Volkov, these guys are the top heavyweights. And they're only a few rankings apart. You know, I'm seeing heavyweight prospects with real talent, you know, real cardio, putting on wars outside of the rankings, and people are missing them because they're on the early prelims. I'm excited for the new wave of heavyweight, but I'm getting off track. Really, all we saw was Taliesin getting the takedown in rounds one and two. Didn't really do much with it. Wasn't really throwing up any real submission attempts, just kind of holding him, doing some really poor ground and pound. He wasn't sort of winding up to get some big elbows like we saw in the co-main event. It was just kind of to hug him and stay there. And Ty really made zero effort to get up. Round two, same thing. And round three, we saw a little bit from Ty. He actually landed he cracked him with some good shots, but then went to the clinch.
mm.
So even in that clinch, there was no elbows, there was no short uppercuts, there was no break elbow, try and get back to distance and slam some more shots. There was just nothing. We went from a really good opener to the main card to
Mm.
a really slow main event. In my opinion, the early prelims for Road to UFC showcased more talent than this fight. And it was extremely disappointing. If we want to talk about what's next before I pass on to you for your view of
Mm.
the fight, Taliesin, this performance doesn't give him anyone inside of, you know, that major top 10. I think he should fight someone from that 14 to 11 spot. You know, maybe
Mm.
give him Shamil Gaziev, who's coming off of a loss. You know, maybe give him Mick Parkin, someone like that. You know, I don't want to see him fight Jalton Almeida. I don't want to see him fight Spivak. You know, maybe you give him Ante Delija, who's coming off a loss, maybe one of those guys. But I'll pass on to you. What were your thoughts on the fight?
Yeah, look, early on watching it, I actually put a lot of IQ points and gave them to Teixeira. I thought, if he had the gas tank, the game plan was actually not too bad to begin with. I was a bit surprised given that he is a bit of a knockout artist with his first round finishes predominantly in the past, other than his loss to Derek Lewis, that he went to the grappling early. You could see that. He attempted one, he missed, he got the second one. And especially with someone like Ty, who it's clear that he's got gas tank issues. He was, we both know how difficult grappling is. It slows you down, makes your arms heavy, and later into those later rounds, I think that definitely won in the fight, even though both of them had terrible gas tanks. Yeah, Ty's been out of the game for what did he have the whole of 2025 off, and he was coming off, a 5 fight losing streak, now a 6 fight losing streak. So. I don't think Ty's done, but I do think he's out of his prime and he'd have to be locked in for a lot longer than, one camp and to do that weight cut. It's like Sugar Sean, he tried to lock in against Marab for one camp, but these guys have been locked in their entire life. like you just mentioned, that top flight of heavyweight. They're not just training and getting off the beers and off the junk food because they've got a camp and a big fight coming up. They're always in shape. They're big boys, but they're constantly in shape. So I could actually see Teixeira climbing the rankings, but I think the UFC needs to, almost like you mentioned, nurture him a bit more, not rush him, because we tried to rush him against Derek Lewis and we saw how that went. You give him maximum up the rankings as Shamil Gaziev, but maybe you do just give him a Tai Tuivasa. Oh, sorry, we've just had a Tai Tuivasa fight. Just looking at the rankings now, but a Mick Parkin or a Shamil Gaziev's good for him. Gives him time to go away, assess what he was lacking, which is first thing to address is get a good strength and conditioning coach and get on that assault bike. For Tai
Yeah.
Tuivasa, I think he probably just is holding on to that number 15 spot in the rankings now.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, there's no depth in this division, but there's some exciting heavyweights that are coming out of those contender series, out of the road to UFC. He's no longer got the shot to go, hey, I was a somebody once. He's a fantastic Australian fan favorite. We love him. He's exciting. He can climb the rankings, but it's time now for him to earn his spot and go, look, I'm going to give a chance to a younger guy who's up and coming, and I'm either going to do what Derek Lewis did to Talisham Teixeira, or I'm done. And I'm going to
Yeah.
ride off into the sunset and go, guys, I was exciting while I was here. I'm a bit of a fan favorite. I'm always going to be an Aussie icon, but it's time now for that heavyweight division to get some new prospects coming through. But yeah, nothing out of the ordinary there. What were we really
Yeah.
expecting? He had a tough weight cut to heavyweight. I mean, come on, some stories write themselves. But yeah, we'll move on to the next one, which I honestly thought was going to be the main event outside of how well
Mm.
Volkanovski performed prior to the card. It was a striking masterclass. Yeah, Fiziev obviously came out strong early. He fought in the pocket. I thought he was doing very, very well in round one. I looked away from my screen for about 3 seconds and I just saw exactly like you called it. Hoofy kept that long range, stayed out of trouble, out of the pocket, hit him with a jab. And I really liked with Hoofy, you could tell that he's evolving as a fighter. Maybe that's from training with your more experienced fighters such as Volk and in that camp. He smelt blood, but he didn't rush. He nearly
Mm.
made one mistake where he sort of went to that front headlock, and you could see it was a bit unorthodox with his legs there at the finishing sequence. But
Yeah.
he was really crisp with his shots, and I thought that showed a lot of maturity as a fighter. That was on such a tear, got a bit of a stoppage against BSD. Thought maybe this is going to put him on a bit of a slide, but I really think that's a massive performance against a guy that I was expecting to win the fight. That was my prediction before this, was that Fiziev was going to be too good for him, too experienced. Done what, 6 rounds with Gaethje, and he's going to win a decision. But yeah, exciting times for Hoofy. I'll pass it over to how you saw it, and then we can go through what's next for both these men.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm pretty sure in the predictions I think I picked Fazeev. But you know, I did think about the length and the range of Huffy. Round one, I actually thought was quite a close round. We saw Fazeev get Huffy to the cage, and he did stay there. He looked comfortable there, which worried me because, as we know, Huffy's a guy that has that OG McGregor karate stance, hands down, kick reliant, kick heavy. We saw a lot of good calf kicks from both men, but yeah, Fiziev really didn't put the pressure on him like he did against Moicano or against Gaethje. We saw a much more tame version of Fiziev, which I think
Mm.
actually cost him in this fight. And sitting in the crowd, I was saying to the people next to me, I was saying, Huffy's finding the jab every single time he throws it out there. Fiziev has that high guard, that Muay Thai stance, but there's no Ilia Topuria head movement. There's no parries. There's no catches. So that part of his game, I feel, is underdeveloped. And I was saying to the people next to me, if Huffy puts that two behind the jab, he's going to knock him out. And that's exactly what happened. We saw the feint with the jab, the hand stayed the same, the head stayed the same, and the two cracked the guard. And we saw what happened from there. As you said, I think it was very mature from Huffy to, he smelled the finish, but he took his time with it. He didn't let
Mm.
him get back up. We saw a very composed, calm, confident version of Huffy. And I think, yeah, that has come from his camp with Volkanovski. I was hearing talks that he may even move to Australia. to permanently stay in the Volk camp. But we do know that he's on good terms with the fighting nerds. He went up to Prates after the fight and gave him a massive hug. So I don't think there's any bad blood there. But the no donning of the fighting nerds glasses after the fight, I think solidified that I don't really think he's a part of that team, as is Eugene Silva and Yokai Baralho. But next for these gentlemen, I think that, there is an interesting dynamic with MMA math with all the people in the lightweight division who have fought each other. Your Moicano, your BSD,
Mm,
your Huffy. There's a real interesting dynamic there. But, maybe Huffy does need to sort of keep working on that grappling. I think this gives him ample opportunity to sort of shoot up the rankings. We're going to see a jump from Benoit Saint-Denis, which is going to sort of put him next to Paddy Pimblett. I think in that top 10 picture, you still have your Mateusz Gamrot. That would be a test for him. Um, you know, Even your Dan Hooker, that would be an interesting fight.
mm.
Or a Paddy Pimblett. But to be honest, I think Saint Denis deserves someone in that top five spot. Again, Huffy's just got back on a win. I don't think he needs the rush up the rankings. But excuse me, for Zeev, he's coming off of a couple losses now. I think he needs to fight down. He needs to fight down in the rankings. Um, Something exciting, giving one of these young guys a test. Maybe you do give him a fresh Ziam. Fiziev going to bump down a few spots on the rankings. Ziam has just come into the rankings with an impressive win his last time out, and I think that'd be a good matchup for him. What were
Mm.
your thoughts? What are your thoughts on what's next for these guys?
Yeah, look, I don't think you actually covered exactly explicitly what you want next for Hoofy, so I'll pass back to you again in a second. But I think the same. I was surprised that Fiziev lost the fight. I'm looking at the rankings now, and I'm just sort of looking at the time frame as to when these guys are going to fight next. I honestly would really like to see Fiziev Chandler looking at the rankings. Obviously, we know.
Mm,
Uncle Dana doesn't really care what the rankings think, or what they mean rather, but I think Chandler's going to be on that White House card. I don't see Fiziev on it. I don't think he's a big enough draw. I
mm,
do think for Hoofy, currently ranked 14th until the rankings update on Tuesday, but yeah, I'd like his grappling to be tested, against a guy, Beneil Dariush, number 11. Unfortunate for Beneil, he's in a best and most terrible spot for him at this point of his career. Like we just mentioned, you could give him Soul Killed, you could give him Hoofy. Hoofy's probably going to jump to around that, 10 to 12 spot, I reckon, after beating number 9 in Fiziev. So I think you give him a bit of a settler and you go, look, we were accelerating this guy, but he needs to be able to test his grappling. Benil's a fantastic grappler. We saw what he did to Moicano. That's the other fight. I think you give Hoofy either Moicano or Dariush. Both of them have got grappling. Both of them have got jiu-jitsu. I think Hoofy wins both those fights, provided he doesn't get taken down, you know?
mm,
And BSD's a monster. He's one of my favorite fighters in the lightweight division. I know that might be an outside bet, but I think he's exciting every
mm.
time he turns up. So I go for something like that. I
Yep.
think Gamrot's going to be a little bit too much of a jump experience-wise for him at this stage. Poor Gamrot's going to be in a bit of a difficult position because he's not the biggest talker. So, are you going to give him a Dan Hooker again? Probably not. Are you going to give him a Pimblett? Maybe, but probably not. I think that they're only doing that to Pimblett if they want him to get a win. I think, yeah, I don't know. I think you do BSD and you do Pimblett after that fight, but we'll get onto that in a second. But yeah, I reckon you go Hoofy, Moicano, or Dariush, and you give Fiziev a Z-arm. It's a bit harsh on Fiziev, but he needs a win. And
He does.
he's still young enough, he's still exciting enough. He needs to go away and he needs to sort of reevaluate his game plan because it wasn't the correct one. But yeah, moving
Absolutely.
on into the next lightweight bout, like we just touched on, we had Dan Hooker versus Benoit Saint Denis. I absolutely nailed it with the pick there. I said finish by ground and pound round two. Um, yeah, I thought Dan was going to get done with that head and arm choke again, but when we were actually watching it live, but my pick was correct. How was that watching that? Did you think Dan had evolved since fighting Arman, or was it sort of, how did you see it unfold?
Yeah, I didn't think Dan was going to win this fight. I think it was a quick turnaround. He didn't take much damage in the Arman fight, but coming up against a guy like Saint Denis who is just ferocious, he's got good grappling, he's got crisp striking. I knew this was going to be a tough one for Dan, but Dan Hooker's a guy who would just say yes, loves violence, loves to fight. Doesn't really do it to run at gold, so he'll fight anyone. But yeah, I didn't really see a lot. I think at the start of round one, he actually did have some success. Some of his takedown defense was pretty good.
Mm.
I think he actually hurt Saint Denis at a point in the fight because Saint Denis looked very timid at a part of round one. He looked
Mm.
very flat footed. I don't know if it was a kick maybe that sort of hurt him, but he did look like a very reserved
I
version of
think he
himself.
spoke on the teep kicks to the midsection, hurting him, and his initial game plan had to be evaluated and changed for that round two, where he went to the more grappling heavy, and he was coming sort of a bit more straight on. He started coming in a few more
Mm,
angles, but that's Dan Hooker's bread and butter. If he was ever going to win that fight, it's from his kicks. He's out of city kickboxing. His teep to the middle is
mhm.
fantastic, his high kicks and things like that. So, yeah, I won't interrupt you too much. Keep going, but yeah, I think just to add on, that's what BSD did report at the end. So.
Absolutely. And that adaptability, I think, speaks to his ability to go far in the division. I think that, like we saw Paddy Pimblett Gaethje, Paddy's game plan didn't change, but this shows a real maturity out of Saint Denis. And I think it's one of the tools that will allow him to go far in the division. It was, yeah, really rough to watch Dan in that position for so long. I really thought that he was going to get that submission, head and arm, and then we kind of went to an arm triangle situation. But yeah, Dan is not one to tap lightly. So yeah, Benoit got up there, pretty much just kept him in that guard and just slammed elbows down, cracked the guard. Herb, if he dies. Dean was a little bit late to the stoppage. In my opinion, I think Dan ate some shots unnecessarily. Um, there was just nothing he could really do in that situation. He's completely past your guard, high with the knees, just crunching down, even when he's winding up for those shots. There's really not much you can do except cover up. You can't really get to an underhook from there. You can't sweep him unless you're a Charles Oliveira. It's extremely difficult. And even then, probably your chances aren't real good against the guy who's like Saint Denis who smelled blood. And we saw a really, really impressive finish.
Mm.
I think that could have been given a performance bonus, to be honest. As impressive as Huffy and Salkild were, that was an incredible, incredible performance. In terms of what I think's next, I think you have to make Hooker Pimblett. It's a bad blood matchup. They're only a couple spots apart. Put it on the co-main of, you know, any pay-per-view. Put it on the main event of a fight night. That's a bad blood matchup. And if we want to get back to the peak times of the UFC, we need good promotion. There is literal bad blood between these guys. It's not fabricated. They do not like each other. When Dan Hooker got asked in the lead up to this fight, by I believe John Kyrie's about it from KO, he said, fuck Paddy Pimblett. He didn't want to talk about it. He does not like him. And if the UFC want to make good fights, good matchmaking, I think their two styles would be fun in a fight. And even Paddy said in his reaction to the fights, he said, "Oh, Dan's grappling wasn't too bad, but he was happy to see him get finished."
Mm.
So give them both some time off, give them both time to go back, reassess. Don't give Paddy anyone above him in the rankings. He doesn't deserve it. He just got outclassed by Justin Gaethje. Hooker's on a two-fight losing streak. Just make the bad blood matchup. Give the veteran a bad blood matchup in the division and make it happen for him. In terms of Saint Denis, I think, and this might be a controversial take, I think you make him fight Arman Sarukian. I think that's an awesome fight. If Arman doesn't want to sit out for a year, make that fight. Gaethje
Mm.
has to fight Ilya. From what I'm hearing, probably at the White House. That came from John Anik at the pre-fight dinner, which we can get into that about the White House at
We'll
another
start.
time.
Mm.
But you got Max fighting Charles for the BMF belt, which is, the number three and the number 4 in the division fighting, you could argue it's almost a number 1 contender fight. If Arman doesn't fight the winner of that, then I think in the meantime, you give him a hungry Saint Denis. He's going to
Mm,
jump up the rankings after this fight. So all you've got above him is Paddy, Max, Charles, Arman, and Gaethje, who's the interim champ. So I think that would be an awesome fight. I think it'd be a real test of Saint Denis' grappling ability and his striking, because Arman's probably the best lightweight in the world outside of Ilia Topuria. What
mm.
are your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, my thoughts are Arman should be fighting, like you just
He
mentioned.
should.
He's the
He should.
best. He should be fighting Ilia Topuria, instead of Justin Gaethje. It's a shame Gaethje's not in the spot that Arman's in, and that we can't see that fight because we have got that changing of the guards sort of happening at the top of the division, with the likes of Max Holloway being injected from featherweight as well. But yeah, Benoit Saint Denis, I think you do one of two options. You say he's fighting Arman, but that's a big risk for Arman. I think Arman wins that fight. Arman and Dan Hooker are, they're chalk and cheese at this point of their careers.
Levels apart.
As Michael Chandler says, he'd beat him 9 times out of 10. He's lost twice, but nah, yeah. So I think you either do that or you go, look, you got to do a bit of matchmaking here, and you got to
Mm.
put things on time frames and be realistic with yourself. Mateusz Gamrot fought Oliveira in October. He's not fought since. How much damage has BSD taken? Let's say he's probably going to have 4 to 5 months off. I think.
Mm.
He's a pretty active fighter. I,
He
I
is.
think you either do Arman BSD. Paddy will not want that fight against BSD. I don't think that's a fight that he wins. I'd love to see it. I think it's a true test. If he beats BSD, he belongs, and I can vouch for that. But I like Mateusz Gamrot versus BSD as a fight night main event. In about depending on how much damage he's got. Look, do I think it's going to bring the eyes to the level that maybe a Paddy fight does? No. Paddy versus Hooker is the real only other option. I think Paddy wins that fight because I think the grappling's going to be too much. But it just depends because Paddy's not really that offensive a grappler. Obviously, we saw him take down Chandler. I wonder if people have taken the blueprint away from Justin Gaethje. I listened to Trevor Whitman's post-fight sort of interview, and he was talking about if you look at all of Paddy's fights, the ones that he's won, their opponent's not putting the pressure on, he's moving back. Jared Gordon had a lot of
Mm.
success pressing him and moving forward, and that's what Gaethje and his team, they've come out and they've said that to the public now. So maybe people look into that and we start to see the slide of Paddy Pimblett. But we'll see. We'll see.
Potentially.
You know what I
I
think?
think, yeah.
No, you go.
I was just going to say, sorry to interject. I don't think you can really give. Who did you say to give to Saint Denis next? Did you say Dayrouche?
I said Gamrot.
Oh, Gamrot. Okay,
Gamrot's ranked
because
seventh. Saint Denis going to be ranked sixth after the rankings update, which means Hooker should jump down to about eighth or ninth. So I
yeah,
think it
I
just
feel like he's
depends.
he's on a 4 fight win streak though. I really don't think on that big of a streak you shouldn't be fighting down. I don't think you should fight down the rankings.
Then
I think
then
he should be
then it
fighting
just
up.
depends on what the UFC decides to do regarding those bad blood matchups, like you said, regarding promotion. How much do they care, or do they just want to put on exciting fights? Because if they want to protect their boy Paddy Pimblett, you know, Justin Gaethje's just shown him up last week. We'll see. We'll see. I think watch the
Mm.
space. Watch the space. The problem,
Yeah,
the problem that we've got is the other matchups above BSD. They're all tied up. You've got Charles
yeah,
and Max. I don't see one of them unless it's an early stoppage via either submission from Charles or, Max just absolutely being too fast and too effective for him. Charles potentially still compromised with that chin from Ilya's knocking him out. And then you've got, Gaethje's tied up now fighting Ilya. So it only leaves Arman. Does he want to stay active? Because he's potentially
mm.
giving up that title shot. He's just fought. I do think he fights again before Ilya, but it'll have to be the right matchup for him. Dan Hooker, like you said, that was just a warm up. So we'll see. But anyway, we've spent enough time on it. Let's move on to the real reason that we're here. Both of our backgrounds tell a thousand word story, but
They do.
the GOAT, of featherweight, potentially the GOAT of UFC, definitely my GOAT. What an absolutely amazing performance. Arguably his best ever for Alexander the Great. So jealous that you got to watch it live. The guy's a
Yeah,
machine. What a
he is,
comeback. I
mate.
can't think of another fighter where I go, his quote, adversity is a privilege, is just, it fits his storyline so well. He obviously came off those two losses, made some questionable decisions coming to fight Islam off short notice, which made his career take a bit of a turn the wrong way. Fought through mental health battle, something that people every day in the everyday world struggle with. And he's such an advocate for just being a good, down to earth Aussie bloke. But mate, he was so crisp. His game plan and his adaptability, I was quite surprised that he went into Diego's world where the jiu-jitsu and the grappling, he got put in a couple of choke holds there. They weren't deep. He even jumped guillotine himself, and pulled guard. Dustin Poirier has indicted him into the Gilly Goose Club, So anyway, that's enough out of me. But tell me how you saw it go down, because I can't stop smiling.
Mate, it was a nail biter if there's ever been one. You know, it was an incredible performance. I think it was this fight proved why this fight shouldn't have happened and why it didn't need to happen. Volk is just too good. He is levels above, even at his spry age of 37. The game plan going into this one was even better than the first one. A lot of the time in the first fight, I believe we saw Volk circling to his left, Diego cutting off. But this time, we saw both guys evolve. We saw Volk hitting the jab, circling to the right. Lopes was sort of switching into that southpaw stance. But the way the Volk was controlling the distance and the movement, honestly, it was reminiscent of a Max Holloway because it was just such a good counter striker. He was just impeccable. He hurt Diego a couple times, and as we know, he's got that granite chin. So I didn't really see him putting him out. But my prediction rang true. It was a masterclass from Volk.
Mm,
I saw some really interesting takes. I watched MMA Guru recap the fight, who thought that it could have gone either way, which I thought was ridiculous. I think he was, on a bit of copium because he picked Lopes to win. Didn't have a good prediction streak for him this card. The comments were flaming him. It was quite funny. Anyway, off topic. But for me, like I think the 49-46 was probably the best way to score it. And that was being pretty generous. Lopes dropped in with a clean hook in round three, but he got right back up. Lopes did have some, I wouldn't say success, but he got to dominant position in the grappling at times. He did have an armbar attempt. He was on the back of Volk, but he just kind of shucked him off. We saw a little bit of play around in the octopus guard from Volk, courtesy of the GOAT, Mr. Craig Jones, who I was fortunate enough to meet at the after party, actually. Amazing guy. But yeah, it was exactly what I assumed it would be. It was a Volk masterclass. And yeah, for Lopes, I don't know. Maybe he should go up to lightweight. I think he's done well at featherweight, but while Volk's around, Lopes isn't touching the
mm,
title. And yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what's next for Volk. I saw they made Lerone Murphy and Mosvar Evloev. That is
mm.
the London main event fight night. So I think you just give him the winner of that. Yair's out of the picture. He does not deserve a title shot. But Lopes, maybe Lopes Yair Rodriguez would be a good fight because that's another bad blood matchup. At the first Volk Lopes fight, they got into it pretty good at the press conference. The translators were having a fun time with that one. But yeah, I think if Lopes wants to stay at featherweight, you give him, maybe you give him a Yair. You could give him, yeah, a fight like that. But those are my thoughts on it.
Yeah,
Yeah, over to
nice.
you.
Yeah, I mean, well, mate, it was electrifying to say the least. I think the difference that I found straight away in this fight was in the first one, I was so worried about Volk's chin. He did get dropped once, and I was, my heart dropped for half a second, but he sprung straight back up. I think he just got clipped. Still room for improvement there, obviously. You get clipped by an Ilia Topuria, you're probably going to sleep again. So Yeah, but Volk's grappling just really impressed me here. He had the confidence to take the fight to areas where it was more dangerous for him. When he jumped that guillotine, it was awesome because he, like you said, he's worked with Craig Jones. He was confident in that octopus guard. Diego got to dominant positions, got his back, but we just saw the composure of Volk, and you heard DC talk about that championship level grappling where they've done the work in the training room and they're comfortable there. If you've had Craig Jones on your back for countless rounds, he's a better grappler than Lopes. And he was able to just separate the legs, separate that body triangle, get him up against the cage, make it difficult for him to, advance that position further or maintain that position. And he got out, It took a couple of seconds, maybe it took a minute, but he got out and he went back straight back to work. Talking about Aussies and, we were talking about the heavyweights earlier, his cardio, the bloke looks as good in round five as he does in round one, and we saw that
Absolutely.
against an Islam Makhachev when they fought. I think that's a superpower for Volk. He obviously has got a great strength and conditioning coach and really hard work ethic. He spoke about how much he sacrifices and his adaptability on the fly. But yeah, next, I think it has to be Movzar or Lerone Murphy. I'd love Lerone to win. I think Movzar will win. Lerone on Pound for Pound podcast spoke on this. He said, if Movsar tries to turn it into a boring fight where he holds him up against the fence and doesn't do much, maybe he will lose. And we'll see. It's interesting. But yeah, I think that's a definite matchup. It's an interesting take you had with Diego moving up to lightweight. I think he's still young enough where realistically Volk's got, what, 3 fights left in him, So he fights the winner there. I agree with you though. Like these next 3 fights, I saw a take that said they can't be any rematches. It's a shame that we've lost that Islam rematch because he came off the couch. But Islam's gone to welterweight now anyway, so it doesn't matter. I
Yeah.
do think Volk, if he manages to get past his next one, which is probably going to be a Movsar Evloev, we'll see what happens with Lerone. Um, he's going to want to end fighting Ilia Topuria. Ilia's not going to bother wanting that fight because he's on a completely different plan. So I don't think we see that. I do think we see Volk fight potentially a Gene Silver in the sort of maybe for that last fight, but who knows? We can only really talk about his next fight, and I think that's got to be Movsar Evloev or Lerone Murphy.